Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight. We're thrilled to have you. And for all the wonderful people we have on the room, I'm told we have about 40 people on Zoom. So that's great. This is a really good turnout. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Karen Conard. I'm the city manager. I'm really proud to be here. I'm giving greetings not only from City Hall, but from the mayor and the council. And we have some councilors here. We have councilors Beth Moreau, Kate Cook, Andrew Bagley, Josh Denton. If I've missed anybody, yell at me right now. The mayor is expected to get here later, but he wanted to make sure he conveyed through me his excitement for kicking things off. I took a couple of notes that I just want to read from my phone. I think we all appreciate the impactful and lasting impact that this process will undoubtedly have on the city. And I think it'll be interesting to start to see everyone work together and see what that means for you individually, for us as city employees, and really for the city at large and the region. And to that end, we have Tim Roach from the Planning Commission here, and that will be wonderful. Where did Tim go? Thank you. We've talked about in the press and before this kickoff, and maybe you've talked about it before I've been able to join, but how the plan will define how the city and its stakeholders map out the path to addressing mitigation and adaptation to ongoing and future climate change impacts in both an effective and equitable way. And I think the key word there is equitable. And I know that that will be a big focus for the team here tonight that Peter Britz, our Planning and Sustainability Director, will introduce in a moment. But I would like to give a special shout out to all the organizations who've been working in this effort before this meeting, before tonight, and we look forward to their collective engagement and contributions to the work. So I'll turn things over to my colleague, Peter. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen, and thanks everybody for coming. It's great to see such a good turnout. I'm Peter Britz, the Director of Planning and Sustainability, as Karen said. We've been looking forward to this event since September of 2021, when the Sustainability Committee recommended to the City Council that they put the Climate Action Plan in the CIP. The City Council and the Mayor were very supportive of a Climate Action Plan. They adopted it in the CIP and into the budget for 23, and here we are now working on the Climate Action Plan. So it's been a long time coming to get to this meeting, but I'm really glad everybody came and appreciate having you guys here. We think that the city hired an excellent team. We have the VHB as the lead consultant, but we have Resilience Planning and Design and Rockingham Planning Commission. So we have a whole set of consultants that will help on the project that I think make it a stronger plan as we go forward. But even more important than the document and the plan they're going to put together is the bringing together the community, and that's what we really think is important for this. And the impacts of climate change need to be addressed. In addition to the Sustainability Committee's efforts in getting this plan started, there's been, as Karen mentioned, a whole host of community partners. First off, I want to mention Portsmouth Climate Action, who has been since the beginning of the drawdown effort. There was a group of people that worked on solutions from the book Drawdown, and from that came Portsmouth Climate Action. They have continued to work on solutions, formed this group, Portsmouth Climate Action, came up with a approach that, to try to get into the community, they wanted to get a dashboard. So they talked to the city and they said, we want to get a dashboard going. We don't want to interfere with the Climate Action Plan. And we said, go ahead. So now there's a dashboard that you can get on the city's website. If you go to the city's website, you can find Bright Action, it's called, and it's right on the home page that you can get right from the QR codes you see around the room, and you can enter information about your daily life that gives you feedback on your impact on climate change. And I just want to mention a couple other organizations while I'm here. The Portsmouth High School Eco Club, SECO Students for Sustainability, C-Ray, SABRE, Portsmouth RAD, Planet for the Planet, Portsmouth Transportation Climate Action Group, and others I'm sure I didn't mention. There was some great success at a sustainability fair last week over Earth Day, and we just want to keep that momentum going, and glad you're all here to support this. So thanks again. And I'll turn it over to you, Donnie, wherever you are. This is Donnie Cole from VHB.
All right. Hi, folks. My name is Donnie Gores-Kolb. I'm with VHB. Let's get going. Welcome. This is going to be a wonderful event, fun, interactive. Get to know your table mates. You'll be having conversations with them. This will be a informative evening, but also we're trying to get things from you as well, some feedback, some input, some thought and ideas. So once again, welcome. Tonight, you will see the agenda on your table. That agenda is a dual purpose, saving paper. On the other side is the questions and some guidance that will help you answer or frame your thought process around those questions as we get into the breakout session. But as far as today's agenda, I'll be going over the project purpose and background. We'll have a summary of the planning process and engagement. Steve will be from RPC will be helping me out with that. Portsmouth's contributions to climate change, just a brief summary of the GHG and greenhouse gas emissions that Portsmouth is generating as a municipality, but also as a larger community. Portsmouth's climate hazards, Tim from RPC will be presenting on that. We'll be having that group brainstorming session that everybody's eager to get and jump into, and then we'll have some report backs. We'll hear what everybody else is talking about, sharing ideas with the larger group. And then next steps in the planning process, and then a big thank you and a workshop closing. We already got into a little bit of this, but the project team, I won't spend too much time, but Portsmouth City staff, so thank you very much for Portsmouth and Peter and Kate Homey and Sarah Cornell from the Public Library and Monty Bohannon, Director of Communications and Community, who recently joined the Portsmouth team. Myself and my colleague Garrison Beck, who is not here tonight from VHB, Steve and Liz in the back, wave your hand there, Liz. Thank you very much, and Tim as well from the RPC. And again, we have a larger team behind us. It's not just us that's working on this climate action plan. It's a larger group of technical professionals from stormwater managers to resilience planners, regional land use planners as well. So it's a good rounded team. And again, we're going to jump right into the polls right now, so hopefully nobody had any trouble accessing it. If you did, raise your hand and one of us will come by and assist you. But again, go to pollev.com, enter VHB Planning 007, and then just be ready for the poll to pop up. And then if you're joining by text, again, just text VHB Planning 007 to 22333, and then just wait for the question to pop up. So I'm going to give you just a couple of seconds here to get straight away. And then we'll have we're already there. Great. So we have just an icebreaker here. So what springtime activity are you most looking forward to? This is timely, this is seasonal, the weather is warming just a little bit. And if you're joining us via text and via Zoom as well, be sure to know that you are able to access the Poll Everywhere software. This is a hybrid environment, and it is a unified meeting in the respect of these real-time polls. So if you are joining us by text, feel free to enter in the letter of your choice. So walking A, hiking B, biking C, outdoor sports D, visiting parks. We've got no responses for visiting parks. Interesting. Gardening, that's one of mine as well. Bird watching, and then none of the above. Maybe some folks that still want winter to stick around. Okay. All right. Now that we've got a handle on the poll software, we'll get into some of the demographic questions. As was mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that we're reaching a broad subset of the Portsmouth population. And let me just try to get through this here. Oh, there we go. Let me go back one step. All right. IMA, select all that apply. Homeowner, property owner, non-resident, renter, student, employee, working in Portsmouth, business owner. You can choose as many as is applicable. All right, looks like it settled down. A lot of homeowners, a lot of employees that perhaps live and work in Portsmouth. Some renters as well. 5% students, so welcome students. Okay. Next question, what is your race and ethnicity? Again, select all that apply, and if you choose not to disclose, you can also just say prefer not to say down at the bottom, letter F. But again, we want to make sure that we're reaching all of the various demographics within Portsmouth. And again, you could choose as many as you feel is applicable. Okay. Next question. What is your age? I should have added a prefer not to say. Okay. And this is a little bit different. We want you to just add in your one word. What one word do you think of when you think or hear climate action? And if you're going to use a phrase like climate change or climate action, just use a hyphen in the middle of those words so it just shows up. And this is a word cloud, so the more times people say a word, enter it into the platform, the bigger that word becomes. All right, so I'm seeing emergency and urgency. We'll get to that in just a second. Accountability, responsibility, resilience. All right, we'll leave this open for just a few more moments, given that it takes a little bit more time to type out than just select a multiple choice. And I do want folks to be thoughtful about their responses. Great, 15-minute city. I'm seeing that term more and more these days. Okay. All right, I'll close the question in 3, 2, 1. There we go. All right, thank you very much for that. Project purpose and background. So just I want to provide a level playing field for everybody in the room. Many of you are coming from the organizations that are working in this area, but many of you may not have a familiarity with climate action and climate change. So just level setting in terms of definition, what do we mean when we're talking about a climate action plan? Really, we're developing a plan, a framework for measuring, planning, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions and the related impacts. And then what are greenhouse gas emissions? Those gases, such as carbon dioxide and methane and nitrous oxide, that trap heat into the atmosphere, causing global warming, which is the increase in the Earth's surface temperature and resulting long-term climate change. So what is climate change? Climate change refers to the long-term changes in the atmosphere, the warming of the atmosphere, but also the warming of the ocean and the land, really affecting the balance of those ecosystems, and then causing extreme weather events as well as sea level rise. And we saw sea level rise being particularly relevant here and popping up in the word cloud. So many folks are concerned with it, and obviously there is a real concern given the climate emergency for coastal cities such as Portsmouth. And when we say mitigation tonight, what are we talking about? Mitigation is any action that is reducing or sequestering or preventing greenhouse gas emissions from being released and then getting trapped and then causing long-term climate change. What is adaptation? So climate action planning sometimes is one or the other, but we're talking about both tonight. So mitigation is reducing and sequestering and preventing greenhouse gas emissions, but adaptation is any action that helps to strengthen or make more resilient the city of Portsmouth and its assets and its resources, including its people and its property. Identifying the vulnerabilities based on the climate hazards and then making plans to reduce or prevent the risk. And then climate justice is a new term that folks are talking about, and more as climate action planning is becoming more evolved and mature. But climate justice is just infusing equity and human rights into the planning process, making sure that nobody is left behind. Because there could be some instances where we think this is a great idea, but it may increase energy cost, and then it may cause lower income individuals from participating, or it may make their current economic situation worse. So just taking into consideration when we're thinking about actions or adaptation measures, just their perspectives, a whole set of perspectives from across the population, just to make sure that, again, nobody is left behind. So acknowledging the climate crisis. This is the urgency, this is the emergency, one of the greatest environmental challenges of the 21st century, as many have stated. Threats to public health and safety and property, and again, particularly in areas such as this, that is coastal. Temperatures in New Hampshire have risen 3 degrees Fahrenheit on average since the early 1900s. And this has caused, or there's a relationship to the warming of snowfall and reducing snowfall and snow cover, increasing annual average precipitation, and having an impact on frequency and intensity of extreme precipitation events, and then also causing flooding. And then municipalities such as Portsmouth does have a key role to play. A lot of the climate action and adaptation and a lot of the impacts affect localities such as Portsmouth. Large policies can come from the federal and state levels, but a lot of the work is being done within the municipalities and by the municipalities themselves. So they have a role to play. Portsmouth has a role to play. Focusing on mitigation, focusing on climate resilience, which, by the way, was not included in the definition, but resilience is just, enhancing and protecting people, property, health, environment through adaptation, and also through preparedness means such as emergency evacuation, emergency plans, things of that nature. So, introduction and purpose of this particular project. We're calling it Portsmouth's Climate Future. So when we hear Portsmouth's Climate Future, we're talking about the Climate Action Plan. Really, we're seeking to enable the city and its community to address and mitigate and adapt to climate change over the next 50 years. We won't be producing or recommending anything that our implementation timeline is not going to be 50 years long, but we have to take into consideration that climate change and the effects of climate change are long term. So we have to think about that from a resilience standpoint. What do the projections look like? What are the areas that are going to be most impacted by those projections? For example, sea level rise. What we're doing as part of this is we're reviewing the city's previous GHG, greenhouse gas emissions inventories. 3 were previously prepared in 2006, 2012, and 2018, and we're going to be presenting some results of those inventories tonight. And we're currently updating, or the city is currently updating, their inventory for the 2021 reporting year. And we'll get into what a greenhouse gas emissions inventory is as well in just a few slides. We'll also, based on the greenhouse gas emissions inventory, based on the sources of emissions and the activities generating, being those sources, and with your input tonight and with the input moving throughout this planning process, we're going to be identifying some ambitious yet achievable goals and targets supported by a robust set of strategies that we are prioritizing and taking through a prioritization exercise to make sure that the city is going to be implementing and putting their investments forward in a manner that is most impactful from a variety of different standpoints, and that's what we want to also get out of you tonight. What are those areas, what are those criteria that the city should be judging whether or not to invest in particular actions? Providing a phased implementation plan. So again, I said we're not having an implementation plan for 50 years. It may be 10 years, it may be 15 years. But things have evolved quite quickly, right? So climate science is changing, more funding is available, so shorter term updates is going to be required as part of this planning process. And after this planning process is done, I mean, it's really not done because there's going to be some post-plan engagement that the city is planning to continue the conversation in terms of implementation and continuous planning. And then setting the stage for, the community and the city to take ownership of the plan at the end of the day, take leading and supporting roles in implementation. But tonight's not the first point at which, tonight's not the start, right? Peter has already mentioned the Sustainability Fair, a lot of the work of the Sustainability Committee, the Blue Ribbon Committee, the work of the organizations that are community-based and grassroots. But in 2007, the City Council declared itself an eco-municipality and it committed to the natural step process. And from what we understand, that's really the start of all of this snowball of focusing on, ensuring that you're sustainable and resilient. And that natural step process and framework has 4 points. One is reducing dependence on fossil fuels and extracted underground metals and minerals. Also reducing dependence on chemicals that build up in nature, reducing dependence on activities that harm life-sustaining ecosystems, and meeting the hierarchy of present and future human needs both fairly and efficiently. We already mentioned the Sustainable Practices Committee, but they've been in operation for quite some time now, directing and advising the city on issues with sustainability impact and building community awareness about sustainability and resilience and climate action. Other groups have been mentioned by Peter and acknowledged, so thank you. Many of you are here tonight. And then the city's recent sustainability achievements are somewhat numerous. The formation of the Advisory Committee on Energy, working to launch community power, and there's a flyer and some meetings coming up on that. And then some 2017 installations of solar PV at the high school and then also at the wastewater treatment plant. And they've undertaken some LED conversions as well throughout the years. And now I'm going to hand it over to Steve, who's going to talk about the planning process and engagement.
All right. Thank you, Donnie. I think you can hear me. Okay. So what we want to do is just give you a quick overview of the project phases, tasks, and timeline, and then we'll give you a summary of the outreach that we envision and the different ways you can plug in beyond tonight. Okay, so there'll be a little bit of overlap. We'll try not to be too redundant here, but tonight really it's the kickoff of phase one. This is meeting one, phase one. You're getting in at the ground level. Some of you were at an earlier volunteer meeting, so you were pre-phase one, so you were in very early. And phase one is primarily constructed of workshops like tonight and other outreach that we'll get into. The baseline condition summary, a crosswalk analysis, and related plans and studies. So looking at what's been done that we can learn from so far. But although the phase one is titled community engagement, there will be community engagement throughout this process, and kind of unique to this process even after the plan is done. There's a meeting and community engagement planned. So phase two of the project is really focused on the community and municipal goals for how you're going to tackle climate mitigation and adaptation, those terms that Donnie talked about earlier. And so the strategies you'll use, the goals and the targets that you'll be setting as a community, which you can all play an important role in. The emissions forecasting, short and long-term funding, which will be critical. Tools for monitoring and reporting back the progress made. And then that plan celebration. You're going to hear us keep mentioning this through the various meetings ahead. But that plan celebration is going to be important to keep bringing people together. And back to Peter's point, that a lot of this is about the community building, the relationship building between all of you. You've been here working on this before we showed up. We want to add capacity and just encourage you to continue that with a bigger group of people. All right, next slide. So this is what it looks like, probably very small. If I was sitting in the back of the room, I probably wouldn't be able to read this, so I'll just give you the lowdown. Most of this work is happening in 2023. So our plan is to have a draft of the climate action plan by the end of December 2023. Early in 2024, we're hoping to have that final meeting, that celebration and kind of forward-thinking implementation meeting, and to really make sure that your collaborative partnerships are in place and stronger than they are today. All right, next. And then as far as outreach and engagement goes, we've broken it down into primarily two ways that outreach and engagement are happening. The simplest one is just getting the word out, getting people such as yourselves here tonight and to know that this is happening and to be able to make a choice to what degree you want to engage in the process. So getting the word out includes the website with the QR code, which was on the flyer. It's on this sign. It's on the tables, on your agendas. At the project website, that's the best place to kind of track this project. You can sign up to be a volunteer. You'll be able to provide feedback there. You'll be able to sign up for notifications. We already have your emails. Some of them we have probably twice or 3 times now. So we'll make sure you're not getting 3 times the emails. But that's the portal. That's the location. Beyond that, we've created this sign that you see here, which is also on the project website, that you can print out and put in your home window, store window, bring to a friend, print as a yard sign. However you want to show your support for this initiative would be wonderful. So hopefully you'll start seeing more of those around the city. Newsletter through the city, social and print media, direct communications, tabling at events. And a lot of this work will get further through the work of climate ambassadors, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a moment. So getting the word out is only part of it. Telling people this is happening, helping them understand what's going on, why it's important, and how they can get engaged. The meaningful engagement comes down to what we can do as a team with the city's help, with city staff help. So having meetings like this, having some online feedback, the hybrid meeting tonight, and really that's spread out over 3 larger public meetings. And we determined early on that that would not likely be enough. And so that's how the concept of the climate ambassadors, having a whole group of you who already have relationships in the city and can get started way faster than we can on this issue. So if we go to the next slide. So the concept of the climate ambassadors, a climate ambassador is a volunteer. When you signed in tonight, you could check a box that you wanted to be a climate ambassador. I think there's 15 or 20 people between here and Zoom that are already identified as climate ambassadors before tonight. If you leave here tonight and you haven't checked the box and you change your mind, you're welcome to check the box, or you can go on the website and sign up. You could have a light touch. You could just post to social media, get some flyers out. Maybe that's the extent of what you want to do as a climate ambassador, or you could be much more centrally involved. For those that want to be much more centrally involved, what we're going to ask of you is to help us. Even if you just went to one meeting or you met with one group of people, that will reach further than we can reach in this process. We want to reach out to your neighbors, organizations that maybe typically don't participate in a municipal planning process, employers, employees, seniors, youth, frontline communities, back to the environmental justice and climate justice piece that Donnie talked about, and any other folks that you think typically are not engaged in this process or sometimes are actually cut out of the process. The process isn't set up for them. It is not welcoming to them. If you have connections with those communities or you're willing to form new connections with parts of the city, we'd like to work with you and we'd like to support you. And so the first step is on May 16th, we're going to have a Zoom meeting. It'll be recorded, so if you're not able to attend, and we'll kind of talk about that process. We'll give you some questions and some tools for providing feedback, and then we'll have a discussion about how to start getting the word out. So it's an exciting aspect of this where really the success of the project will go so much further with all of you engaged. Okay, it's end of my slides for now, and it's back to you.
Yep, thanks, Steve. All right, so Portsmouth's contributions to climate change, and this is where we're describing the greenhouse gas emissions from the local government and its operations and at the community scale. Now, I'm going to gloss over some of the technical pieces here. This PowerPoint presentation will be uploaded to the project website, so if you're interested in seeing the details, and if you're interested in diving into the reports, the city also posts the inventories to their website as well. But as I mentioned, previous inventories were completed in 2006, 2012, and 2018, with a current update being prepared now for the 2021 reporting year. Essentially, why are we conducting greenhouse gas emissions or inventories, and why are, I mean, they're the basis of climate action planning. They're the start. It gives us an understanding of what emissions are being generated within a certain boundary. It tells us how many emissions are being generated by various sources, what's under the control of the reporting entity, and what is under the influence of the reporting entity, but controlled by others. And then we do it on a regular basis. And as you may be asking, why has the city been preparing so many greenhouse gas emissions inventories? Well, it's to compare from year to year to year to year to measure progress. Have your emissions gone up? Have they gone down? What are the potential reasons for those deltas, those changes? So that's why we conduct a greenhouse gas emissions inventory. Now, again, this is more of the technical pieces, but the thing that I want to get away from provide to you tonight on scopes is that the greenhouse gas emissions inventories are prepared by standards and protocols. And in order to make sure that the city of Portsmouth's greenhouse gas emissions inventory versus the city of Boston are not overlapping in any way, just two examples, not the greatest examples, we have our scopes. So scope 1 is everything that's under the city's direct control, things that are being consumed in their boilers, in their HVAC units, things of that nature. Scope 2 is what is being purchased in terms of electricity, and scope 3 is everything that's indirect that the city is influencing, employee commuting, product purchasing, things of that nature. And similarly for the community, scope 1 is direct activities happening within the boundary. Scope 2 is purchase electricity within the boundary, and then scope 3 is all the other emissions that are happening outside of the boundary, but because of activities occurring in the boundary. And how are emissions calculated? Basically, you take activity data such as kilowatt hours of electricity consumed, you multiply it by an emission factor, and then you get an emissions total, often presented and typically presented in metric tons of CO2e equivalent. So you're taking all those greenhouse gas emissions and boiling them down to one equivalency number. In terms of Portsmouth municipal greenhouse gas emissions, about 10,000 metric tons CO2e in 2018. This is equivalent to about 24 million miles driven by the average gasoline-powered vehicle, according to the EPA's greenhouse gas equivalency calculator. The buildings, scope 1 and 2, were the largest contributing sector, followed by water and wastewater, and then employee commuting. You can see that buildings represented about 53% of the total, again, that over 10,000 metric tons CO2e. And within that sector, the high school, the middle school, and city hall responsible for most of it. Fleet, which is 14%, you see that in the red in the pie chart there. That accounts for, it's third amongst the scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, but the highway department and the police are responsible for about 60% of that. In terms of the comparison between 2012 and 2018, emissions were reduced by 34.2%, with the largest declines occurring within the streetlight sector, again because of those streetlight conversions that happened between those reporting years, followed by waste and wastewater sector, declining about 53.6%. But I should note that many of these reductions, and this is an externality to Portsmouth, is all of the fuel sources that are going into the electricity supply. So as the electricity supply is getting infused with more renewable energy, those emissions, scope 2 emissions, are getting reduced. So the state of New Hampshire has a renewable portfolio standard saying that about 25% of the energy supply is going to come from renewable sources by 2025, and I think you're at about 17% as of the last check with EIA. So a little bit of ways to go between 23 and 25, if I'm not mistaken. But the more cleaner the grid becomes, the more emissions are reduced. In terms of the community, 430,000 metric tons CO2e, and that's 1.1 miles driven. And the residential, commercial, and industrial sectors, so the units of residential, the buildings of commercial, and the buildings of industrial, all combine to account for about 65% of those community emissions, with natural gas and fuel consumption and other fuel consumption being scope 1, accounting for about 62% of those emissions. And electricity consumption accounting for the remainder. So a lot of the leverage is in the building systems that consume natural gas, that consume fuel oil, that consume propane. The transportation sector was the largest independent contributing sector at 34%, and that's largely all of everybody that's residing or passing through Portsmouth in their gasoline or diesel-powered cars, traveling over 220 million miles in 2018. And a comparison again between 2012 and 2018, some steep declines here, 84% and 40% respectively between residential and commercial and industrial. A lot of this has to do with the electricity becoming greener, and some of it does have to do with some data and accounting. But emissions from natural gas, propane, and fuel oil, it's that onto themselves was an overall increase by 37%. So that could be new construction happening, or that could be, largely new construction and greater population perhaps that is consuming more energy within the buildings. And then waste and transportation, between the 2 years, the counting was a little bit different, so they weren't compared between inventory years. And now, Tim, will you present on climate hazards?
I can do that. Thanks, Donnie. My name's Tim Roach. I'm the director at Rockingham Planning Commission. I have my script, but I'm not even going to look at it. I'll just go wing it here. I get kind of excited when I get the chance to talk about climate hazards. This is where my background as a meteorologist, my academic background as a meteorologist, and my professional career as a planner collide. And it sounds a little twisted to be excited to talk about these things because they aren't fun for a community to deal with and address. However, what are the risks to Portsmouth when we talk about climate change? I think saw a lot of the words go up in the word bubble. I'm going to talk about a few others though as well. Extreme heat being one that doesn't get talked about around here, and I don't believe it's an immediate threat given the proximity to the North Atlantic. Tends to be extremely cold, as most of you know that swim around here. You don't get in the water until about August 15th, and then you're lucky if you stay in for 10 minutes. However, I think if you have been here for a few months, if you lived here in the region for a few months or at least, you'll see that coastal storms are the real threat and the real issue that I think most people are focused on. And that threat is today. You don't even have to worry about, climate change and sea level rise. We have that issue from extreme weather right now. That's only going to be exacerbated with future climate change as the atmosphere continues to warm. In fact, if you look back about 4 months, was anyone here around Christmas time for December 23rd? Yeah, that got your attention, I would say, in terms of the impacts of that particular storm. The causeway out to Newcastle went under. There was a good 1.5 feet, 2 feet of water on most of Prescott Park. And it wasn't even a nor'easter, believe it or not. That was a completely different type of storm that caused that. That wind was coming out of the southeast, about 75 miles an hour at times. We had a high tide, and you've got a slightly higher than normal sea level right now. That pushed about 3 feet of water up into the coast. So that's the real hazard I think that this community is facing. And think about that for a minute. If you were here and you remember what that water level was like, we plan for sea level rise, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years into the future. That level of water on that day correlates well to what we expect 3 to 4 feet of sea level rise to look like. So when you talk about sea level rise in the future as a potential hazard, forgetting about the storms, think about that water level. And when we say, we expect 3 feet of sea level rise by X year, that's where the water would be in Prescott Park. That's where the Newcastle Causeway would be. It's hard to get your head around that sometimes. So I'm hoping, today's storms are giving us a little bit of a crystal ball view into the hazards that we could be facing under future sea level rise conditions. The city is very much aware of these risks and these hazards. They've worked closely with the Regional Planning Commission for the past 10 years or so. on a number of different vulnerability assessments, their hazard mitigation plan. We've done some assessments of which roads would be impacted, which roads would be closed, what will happen to the transportation system. And all of that information is sort of part of this plan. While the focus here is greenhouse gas emissions and what you can do as a community, it's important that we keep these hazards in mind as you look forward. And if there are things that you're concerned about related to those hazards, we'll take them in as part of the input, and certainly the Planning Commission can help and incorporate those into future coastal resilience planning efforts. So with that, I guess I will turn it back to you, Donnie.
Thanks, Tim. And as Tim mentioned, when we're talking about mitigation ideas, we should be having in mind co-benefits that relate to adaptation and resilience. So when we're thinking about solar PV and putting it on top of a parking lot as canopy, perhaps we could have a battery tied to that. If we can, think about, expanding the tree canopy for carbon sequestration, maybe we could do so in a manner that reduces erosion potential down the line. So just think about the co-benefits of all of the different actions, and not to mention, the co-benefits with resilience, but community benefit as well. So a climate mitigation plan doesn't necessarily have to just focus on climate mitigation. You can think of the trees as being aesthetically pleasing and providing recreational and just respite from the urban environment. You can think about having solar PV as being providing some shade in the case of the parking canopy example. A good land use, reuse for landfill type activities that otherwise would continue to just be a vacant location. So think about how all of these different mitigation actions could really support the community overall, not just for climate mitigation and resilience, but for community well-being. All right, now it's the second fun part of the night.
All right, this is your turn. So we're gonna set you loose in your groups for about 50 minutes. I'm going to be the timekeeper, so you'll hear from me occasionally like that you should be moving on to such and such question. What we'd like is you have paper on the table. If you need more, just flag us down. We'll come bring you some. But if there could be somebody at the table who's willing to be a facilitator or note taker, just to make sure you're getting things down, that would be wonderful. There could be a different person who's willing to report out 50 minutes from now, or it could be the same person. We'll let you sort that out. So the questions are on the other side of the agenda. We'll also have them up here on the slide in a minute, and we'll keep those up. We will give you those notices to keep you moving. We're just going to ask a couple basic ground rules, and I'm not worried about this group. This is a very engaged and informed group, but make sure everyone gets a chance to talk. Be respectful of everyone's contributions. If you get stuck, you can move on. You don't have to solve all of the climate problems tonight. This is the beginning. But we do want to start to get your input. And be creative, have a good time. Think about the co-benefits piece that Donnie just mentioned. That's a really nice cue. And next slide. You'll notice on your tables, we also gave you some note paper, some little Post-it notes. Those are just there if you need an additional way to provide input. If you're feeling like the 5 minutes we gave you for question 5 isn't enough and you want to write some things down, please do. If you're feeling like the note taker has their hands full and you want to help them out, please use the note cards, but it's not required. So the first question we're about to ask you to start to focus on is when it comes to mitigating greenhouse gas emissions from A, energy supply and consumption, B, transportation, C, waste management, and D, land management, where do you think the city should focus its efforts? How can it achieve efficient and effective greenhouse gas emission reductions in these areas? See what comes to mind for your group. Follow that line of thinking for about 15 minutes, and then we'll give you a cue to move on to question 2. The other questions you're going to move through a little quicker. You're probably ready to talk to each other. You've heard enough from us, right?
Okay, and we're going to welcome back the Zoom folks, the folks that are joining us virtually. We want to do a report back now, and I'm just going to bring the mic from table to table. Hopefully you've all identified your report back person. What we're going to do, because we're going to be, we could be here all night long through midnight if we report back on everything everybody wrote. We're just going to do one key thought and idea from each of the different questions. So what I want to do is go for clockwise, and I'll start in this corner here. So do you guys have a report back person identified yet? All right.
So I'm supposed to do it by question or okay. Whoops. So on the energy, felt that trying to facilitate more charging stations, encourage heat pump use and installation. One thing that affected several areas was really being more aggressive at developing workplace housing, and that so many people live outside of Portsmouth and commute in. So if it can finally have some affordable housing locally, that should make a big difference. With recycling, just trying to clarify things, encourage composting, encouraging solar installation, either through tax credits, but also the city actually installing more solar installations on their buildings and open space. Am I supposed to zip down through? No. Right. Big thing was trying to encourage more energy efficient and alternative transportation and bike pedestrian pathways, shuttle buses, to make public transportation more usable. Let's see. Skip to 3. We felt that the city really should be very aggressive at pushing climate plans. Another item that came up under land use and is avoiding building in areas that are susceptible to flooding, so that protecting those spaces would be very important. On number 5, trying to combine alternative transportation with more affordable housing to, again, decrease use of cars and such. Under 6, we felt that particularly lower income populations are often going to be negatively affected, and again, land use with more workplace housing we felt was important. And under activities, activities such as this, but also having regular lesson plans for the schools to encourage climate sensitive things. So.
All right. To jump in here, so we went really big on question 1. To pick one of this, I think code requirements on new buildings and renovations and how they come along, and just being more stringent on those codes in some regards and easier on others, like in what incentivize like workforce housing, and more stringent on the energy side. In terms of the barriers, I think it was very circular, but it was pretty much centered around cost of some of the policies, some of the incentives, and some of the products that are more efficient, and also the ease of use and convenience of some of the policies like transportation, how easy it is to get to a bus or transit or walk or do things around the community. Number 3, we thought that the city should have a very aggressive carbon neutral standard, hopefully by 2050. Both at not only at their level, but the city's properties, but also at a community level, trying policy in place that could promote that at a community level. Number 4, we pointed at sea level rise being the major impact on city infrastructure, and what was I forgot what the full question was asking. So because of that, because of the sea level rise, having more resilient infrastructure and prioritizing resiliency when the city decides where to put things or where to invest. Number 5, we had when the city is looking into buying goods or properties or updating systems, having prioritizing efficiency and high quality and carbon neutral in terms of like that's be so GHG emissions reductions, number 1, climate adaptivity and resiliency of the product or the service, and equity and justice. Those are the 3 things that we prioritize over the other. Number 6 was that yes, low income, as our table said, low income and fixed income people are the kind of more vulnerable, less people with access, and so trying to figure out how to get to and getting their take should be a priority. And then number 7, outreaching out to schools, in your water bill, in I said your car tickets when you get a ticket, having outreach at pretty much any possible way through social media, through newsletters, through radio, TV about incentives and programs and things that the city's working on, or just ideas on resiliency and climate adaptivity.
We're going to go to the Zoom right now. So Monty?
Thank you, Donnie. I'm reporting back for our Zoom group, and for question 1, one of the things that we talked about was mitigating greenhouse gas emissions was using old housing stock and new buildings and land use changes to retrofit those old buildings to make them more energy efficient, but coupling that with historic preservation. We had actually someone on our Zoom chat who is doing exactly that for her career, so she thought that was a big one for her, and that the embodied carbon within the older buildings would have us work toward making those energy efficient rather than knocking them down and building new. And we talked a little bit about transportation and more EV stations. And for question 2, really looked at policy change and what we can do for building codes, land use reform, and incentives, again, to retrofit those older buildings and to build affordable housing. And we talked a lot about tax structure in New Hampshire and how that makes it very difficult for municipalities to prioritize things it limits what municipalities can do. Sorry, I should just read what I have here in front of me. And one of the things that was a barrier for some people was knowing what resources are available and where you can personally make a change. So again, I think it goes back to that education piece. And we had sort of a little bit of split decision on question 3, where some of the participants thought we should be very aggressive and that Portsmouth should be at the forefront of this initiative and positioning Portsmouth as a leader in the state, and others were on board with, yes, we need to be doing work, but we need to balance that cost with the aggressiveness, and to really use public policy and outreach to make sure that we're bringing everybody along and we can get people on board. Question 4, we talked about environmental impacts of deforestation, to keep natural space for beauty as well as mitigation, and to look at our land use and conservation of resources. Question 5, we talked a lot about equity and prioritizing those initiatives where most people can benefit as an equalizer, where not only a few can benefit out of that investment, and being really transparent on the initiatives and the timelines, and also being strategic in staging them so that one could build on the next. And question 6, we talked about, again, natural resources, water supply, et cetera, target audience, how accessible is the information that we are compiling here to the general public, and how do we bring people along who may not be attending, and to try and break down these larger, more difficult things to encompass into small actions and habit changes. And then we talked about it in question 1, but trying to keep to one thing, really looking at planning for migration as a result of climate change was a big topic throughout. And question 7, how do we reach folks who aren't here? Looking at real projected costs of if we did nothing. And looking at talking to people directly who have the most at stake, who are in the rising tide level area, and making the economic argument of the cost of cleanup hit them in the pocketbook was one of the things that was said, and I think that's it.
Great. Thank you, Monty, and thank you everybody on the Zoom. There we go. There you go.
Hi. Our group had lively talking, beat the clock on every question. For 1A Energy, we, like other groups, thought a lot about policy and zoning. We really want to see green buildings incentivized and promoting renewable energy. Have much more renewable energy in city buildings as a requirement, and then incentives for commercial and residential buildings. And we understand there are restrictions put on us by state law, so we don't know what to do about that. Transportation, we thought improvements in public transportation would be important, and to transition city vehicles to EVs in the near term. Make safer bike paths, and we talked about the rail trail being completed soon, revisiting one-way and two-way traffic on streets for better bike safety. Waste management, we talked about having neighborhood compost collection. Right now we have the compost collection at the city yard, but to make it more convenient, get people more likely to do it. And then better community education about recycling, what goes in, what shouldn't go in, so it's more effective. And then land management, we wanted to see zoning for commercial solar, more targeted density and zoning provisions for that, HDC guidelines to accept solar more. So question 2, the barriers. We thought one thing would be good. We talked a lot about a policy for the operating and capital budgets that would have criteria for energy and sustainability. So that would be an overarching policy that would address some barriers, like the costs for green buildings, to to consider the reduced operating costs. We didn't know about funding sources for green buildings. People don't bicycle because they feel unsafe on the roads, the inconvenience of doing composting, and then a big barrier we saw was NIMBYism in Portsmouth. Number 3, how aggressive the city should be in pursuit of greenhouse gas reductions. We felt in our group as aggressive as possible. Education about carbon reduction, get Chamber of Commerce involved, to mandate net zero new construction, to follow the Paris Agreement guidelines. So then we jump to question 4. How have climate hazards affected us today? We talked about health impacts, the respiratory, someone mentioned ticks and allergies. We see these all happening. Flooding causing property damage and decreasing values. Wind and increased severe storms and damage. 5 is about how the city should prioritize. So we felt like the highest impact with carbon reduction would be how we would prioritize. And we had a learning moment with Tracy talking about the high impact of a low-cost thing of weatherization and how sometimes that gets overlooked for the more popular photovoltaics or solar. Consider operational cost savings for some of these upfront capital costs. Number 6, particular population groups. We talked about elderly and having Zoom watch groups in different settings like elderly housing, low income, disabled. We felt like students and youth could be ambassadors coming back to their families and getting their parents to do things. And then, like we had this meeting tonight, having hybrid meetings, everybody thought that was a good idea. So it's not just the people who come in person, but the people who come on Zoom can still participate. 7 is about promoting education and awareness. Again, start with schools. Kids are going to spread not just the information, but their enthusiasm. And we have Monty with us, so we'll be all looking for social media and a couple of new staff positions related to that. And then we talked about how important it is to include apps in a lot of the way of reaching young people. Bright Action is going to be an app in the next couple of months, so look for that. Flash vote, we've all seen in the city newsletter. And then one-on-one personal outreach, I think, where we have teachable moments. I think that's really important, and working through neighborhoods.
Wow. The bar has been raised. How about this table?
So I'm not going to mention everything that everyone else has mentioned because it's probably on our list. For question 1, just some things that I wanted to highlight that we said were with regard to the state legislation to allow us to have regulations regarding climate change, that we need to support legislators that or legislators that are climate conscious, and that we need to lobby for action regarding climate. We also talked about increasing recycling by doing single stream. It seems like when we drop our stuff off right at the city yard, and I see people doing all kinds of things that means that the whole load that's supposed to be recycled is not going to go be recycled because it's contaminated. So if we went back to single stream, and even if it's just for glass and paper or glass, metal, and paper, you know, we want to get rid of plastics as much as possible, and so we need to support the city's efforts regarding plastic bag, getting rid of plastic bags. Then for question 2, this is the one about barriers that we face, and it's basically financial. Most people, I think, have financial limitations that are going to inhibit their ability to move forward with some of the things that we're suggesting. Question 3 is how aggressive should the city be? The city should be very aggressive, and the city should set an example regarding the community, and hopefully the community will follow. But we're looking at a more moderate response from the community, but a very aggressive one from the city. For question 4, how have we been affected? So flood insurance has increased dramatically over the past few years. Ground source water sources contaminated with salt water. And there's an impact on our cultural resources, such as Prescott Park and Strawberry Bank. Storm damage and impact on power, transportation, contaminants. For question 5, we have how should the city prioritize its climate action investments, biggest bang for the buck? How can we be the most efficient in spending the dollars that we have available? So that was basically that. What are particular populations? So low income population, elderly, potentially renters, or people that are subjected to condominium restrictions that can't maybe compost or whatever. I think that's it for that one. And then number 7 is how can the city promote education and awareness? And we were thinking that having outreach events, I think that maybe your table also said that, where you actually go to the low-income housing like Gosling Road, Wamisit, wherever else we have low-income housing, and reach out to those people. Sometimes they're too busy. They've got too many other things they're thinking about that this can't be a priority for them. So if we can somehow reach out to them, that's it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm just going to zigzag here.
Okay, I'm not going to repeat a lot of the great suggestions and ideas that have already been said, so I'll try to be really quick. In terms of the city concentrating its efforts, we felt that there's really not sufficient time to choose one or few over others, that you need to synthesize mitigation to all planning choices and actions, focus on all simultaneously. Obviously, simpler actions that can be taken quickly, make sure that any technological innovations are actually employed and used correctly, need to educate the community on availability of funds, new buildings, increase in efficiency standards, but the economic justice component, if you increase efficiency standards and impacts the cost of construction, does that exacerbate the housing crisis? Housing becomes either more expensive or less available. Advocacy on the state level, organized with other like-minded communities. 2 was the barriers we face personally: affordability, availability, and understandability of information, competition for scarce dollars, difficulty in relying on public transit in terms of its availability, the availability, affordability, and accessibility of EV charging network. Narrow streets make bicycling challenging for some. Personal finances limit what a household can reasonably be expected to undertake. And then kind of more of an esoteric question, the direct connection between what is happening and the impact it's going to have on our collective future and our own personal actions is very challenging to sympathize and accept, because to a large degree, no matter what we do, given that it's a global challenge, the actual impact may be really small. So, but to try to keep people engaged in light of that is challenging. In terms of the aggressiveness of the city, very aggressive. Our reach should exceed our grasp, but we also must be cognizant of the impact of the cost of living here and economic justice concerns. Climate actions that affected us personally: rise in energy costs, price shocks last winter, flooding, flood insurance. Number 5, prioritization of climate investments. Again, just talking about what we talked about in the first, that there should be a systemic way of analyzing, given all the criteria, so that you kind of do a mapping and it becomes clear in going through that process what actions should be taken when and how to integrate all the possible actions. 6 particular population groups. Climate impacts on low, lower, and fixed income population, flooding, extreme heat and cold, vulnerability of certain housing stock, cost impacts of remedial measures, rising taxes. And 7 we didn't get to.
All right, thank you very much. I just want to note that it is 8:40. We're going to continue to go through the tables, but if anybody absolutely has to get home, we won't be offended if you stand up and leave. But why don't we continue with the report backs here? I'm assuming you...
It's good going last because everybody said everything already. But we did come up with a few things that either double down on other ideas we've already heard this evening or might be new or unique. So many good ideas. A couple that we didn't hear so much were city benefits in terms of those commuter miles for city employees, carpooling benefits, EV credits for city employees, cheaper local housing. I mean, this is why people live far away, as they can't afford to live here. We're wondering about like really big ideas, like a tidal barrier would only cost about $500 million. You know, it's we haven't heard that one yet. What sort of scale should we be looking at here? Should we be thinking bigger? Eco-housing came up a lot in our discussions as well, and other ideas related to green urbanism, the 15-minute city, pedestrianisation, and something I don't think we heard too much about tonight, tourism, which is, of course, a big part of our economy here. All those tourists drive here and they drive through town. How can we make this a desirable green destination? How can we, make sure that the tourists are included in this conversation somehow? Maybe they can pay for it. Number 2 here, barriers. Well, people problems. We had a lot of the different people problems today. People don't like change. They don't like tax, in particular. So what do you do about that? Well, things that maybe we could do something about. Planning controls we heard about. Make it easier to put in these green things, like let's reopen the discussion about solar panel setbacks and that kind of thing. Relating back to planning and for people not liking change, historic Portsmouth, how much does Portsmouth have to stay the same as it is now versus how much does it really have to radically change to make it through the next few centuries? But I think the most outrageous suggestion we heard tonight was, what if we disbanded the Historical District Commission and replaced it with the Eco Housing Commission? Aggression, that is certainly a more aggressive idea. Question 3, how aggressive should the city be? I think what we settled on here was, we'd love to hit the Paris goals, but what we felt was pragmatic was something like, whatever the market will bear. What level can we come in at that won't result in a revolt or, a massive change in political direction? We can't answer that around this table, but it should be something we could try and figure out. And so whatever the market will bear, and maybe a little bit past that, please. Hazards. We heard a lot about local hazards. I think 2 things we didn't hear quite so much about was the human health factor. So not only how tropical diseases will slowly make their way up here, but issues around cooling and heat stroke and so on, and building in more cooling capacity, and thinking about how we build our senior centres and other structures to bear in mind what the climate will be like in the future. And then human hazards. By the end of the century, I read there'll be something like 1.2 billion climate refugees. And that's going to include internally displaced people within the United States. The people who are currently moving to Florida are going to come back, and where are they going to live? How do we prioritize? I think the pragmatic suggestion that we all liked was to prioritize co-benefits. So the measures that bring obvious benefit to householders and taxpayers, things that save money. So the heat pumps, the winterization, and so on. But of course, also we want to reduce CO2 urgently as much as possible, so having equal effort on emissions reduction. Number 6, people groups. So definitely people on lower income. Someone mentioned the unhoused as well, who of course very impacted when we have these extreme weather events. And other groups that we are concerned with are of course the NIMBYs. I think the table over there mentioned as well is how can you bring along the people who are just very resistant to change? Which brought us to number 7. Schools came up a lot, local clubs, businesses, and just bringing the youth more into this as well. Maybe these things should happen, a bit closer to the right side of bedtime to encourage youth participation. There we go.
Thank you. That was a wonderful summary. Any volunteers?
So again, a lot of the things that groups have already mentioned were things that we talked about. One of the things under energy that we did spend some time talking about were the possibility of solar farms in Portsmouth, or just the ability of Portsmouth to produce more of its own energy here locally. We're all thrilled about community power, but is there a way that we can bring that even closer to home? Transportation, this group is very committed to transportation, whether it's EVs or better bike access, or just one of the things that we talked about a lot was coast and public transportation, and how do we make it more efficient and more accessible so that it is something that people are motivated to use because they know it's reliable, it's not going to significantly change their routine or their schedules or those kinds of things. Waste, we talked a lot about, some sort of municipal compost, whether it's a neighborhood cleanup or residential specifically, reviewing our recycling policy, what is actually getting recycled, what is the best plan for moving forward with recycling. We also talked a little bit about, just in a broader sense, what does renewable energy actually mean? Because there is a push in that world that advanced or chemical recycling become an option for renewable energy, and that's a concern to us about burning plastic as a form of energy and it being considered renewable. Land management, I don't know if we've really addressed that one specifically. Number 2, barriers or challenges, or pretty much everybody's already said it. It's convenience and efficiency, cost, zoning issues or public policy, and state law, and how that impacts what we're able to do as a municipality. How aggressive should the city be? We thought the municipality itself should be very aggressive. We would like to see that at a community level as well, but we realize there might need to be a bit more buy-in, so we might have to kind of balance that a little bit better about getting people to engage. And have longer-term aggressive goals as a community, maybe. And feel free to chime in if I'm missing anything. How have the climate hazards presented today? I think everybody's already touched about them. We talked about ticks and blood-borne illnesses. We talked about flooding. We talked about air quality and exposure to chemicals and things, whether it's in the ground or water, wherever, in our food. We also talked about drought. We are starting to have summer droughts, and that impacts water usage and even just people's ability to have backyard gardens and those kinds of things. So we did talk about that a little bit. How should the city prioritize its climate action investments? Co-benefits for us were actually a priority, and just getting to think about what people said, what has the most bang for their buck, but not only from a financial perspective, but also from a health perspective, and just really looking at these initiatives that we take, how are they going to impact us beyond just addressing greenhouse gas emissions? Are there particular populations? I think everybody's already talked about them, the low income, the elderly, people who might not be so mobile. We also talked a lot about schools and getting students more involved, which just sort of goes into number 7, which was have neighborhood conversations, maybe do more social media stuff, again, get students involved, take this show on the road and get to the communities and the people who can't come to City Hall or have odd hours and those kinds of things, and try to engage with them that way.
I saw you starring some of the notes.
I really don't want to take up any more of people's time. I know your time is very valuable. So I'm just going to highlight some that maybe have not been mentioned. For number one, when we talked about waste management, just wanted to highlight the efforts of a regional management network where, you know, maybe we go in on a power purchase agreement with other communities to build more coordination on exactly, you know, how to meet some of the waste management goals that Portsmouth would come up with. For number two, you know, the barriers, changing the mindset. Like I'm gonna quote you, Doug, the illusion of limitless growth. So relating that to, you know, you can put as much waste in the landfill, it doesn't matter. There won't be any issues with that. So that's what we put for barrier. Number three, in terms of, what was number three? Aggressive pursuit of GHG emissions reductions. I think this was more about, one of the efforts was looking at city audits across buildings over a certain age, specifically for methane gas. Number four was, we talked about PFABs, the issue of quality drinking water. Number five, in terms of, you know, there's a mix of low-hanging fruit but high impact, so we referenced the Eisenhower principle and how to kind of prioritize using that framework. And then number six, a lot was said there already. And then number seven, it was really where, like, we find people congregating.
Thank you. And thanks to everybody. Thanks for your participation. Peter, do you want to have a closing note? Yes, thank you, Steve. So we're going to be summarizing all of the notes that you've taken today. So hopefully they're robust. They do look robust. So thank you again for that. Thank you for the note takers, especially, and the report back folks. We are going to summarize them, post the notes in a summary to the project website. I'll also say that the questions that you saw and discussed today, for those that were not able to make it today to participate, those questions will also be up on the website as a survey, or as a questionnaire rather. So if you have neighbors that you want to go to them and say, oh, I went to this climate action meeting, and they're like, what is that? Say, go to the website, take the survey. All of the input is really important, really helpful. So with that, we have a few next steps, just continued engagement. Steve and his ambassadors, and moving forward and getting broader outreach into the community. Finalization of the 2021 greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So once that's finally done and written up, that'll be posted to the website as well. Workshopping with the city affiliated and community-based organizations, reaching out to them specifically. They've been working in this area for quite a while. They have some ideas. They have some initiatives that they've already been pursuing. And then strategy feasibility assessment. So everything that you talked about today, all of the great ideas, they're going to have to be run through an initial streamlining process of, is this feasible? Is it, does it work within current regulations? Does it work within the context of the city of Portsmouth? They're not going to be thrown out, but it's just going to be highlighted as maybe they're either feasible or infeasible at this juncture. And those that are feasible are going to advance to the next level of analysis. So with that, Peter, thank you very much from the consultant team, from myself, from Steve, from Tim, and there you go.
I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming. I guess the next step that I would recommend is if you want to keep up to date on the project, Portsmouth Climate Future, type it in the search bar on the city's webpage or scan a QR code, and you'll get up-to-date information about the project. So it was a really impressive turnout. I really appreciate all the great feedback. The one thing that the mayor impressed upon me and other city councilors is they're looking for feedback for the community, kind of like what you said about being aggressive with our goals at the city and the city government. The city council needs this document, this process, to understand what the support is in the community for spending more money. Should they be spending money in the budget on more greenhouse gas emissions reduction efforts or other things? So this is really helpful for them, for our city going forward, and just again, thank you for all your time.